was really nice. Are we using this or this? This?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to talk loudly while I put it on. To say that I am very easy to cry, and so much so that my organization, NTEN, we put on an annual conference, and it's a massive conference, you know, a couple thousand people. However, it is so easy to make me cry with touching words, normally not about me, normally about incredible work that nonprofits are doing in the community, that we have a button at the conference that says, I made Amy cry. So it was very touching, but just context that was easy to do. Awesome. Thank you all for coming out here. To be super honest, am surprised that there are so many of you. As folks can even say, I was prepared for there to be 5 people, one of which was Martin, and just to like have a small conversation. So since you all are here, now I have to do what I was asked, which is, can't believe it. But what I was asked to do is talk a bit about my career path. I guess at this stage I could say that it has been a career path. In the lived experience of any moment during the course of it, it did not feel like a path or a career. It felt like I was going to work that day. So from this perspective, at least, looking back, share a bit about my career path, and then talk a bit about my passions and interests when it comes to nonprofit technology. Not only because I work at NTEN now, and we have deep passions in that space, but also because those are kind of the threads throughout my career. And I know I'm supposed to just like jabber, 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 and then we do questions at the end. But if I'm talking about something that doesn't make sense, like I'm using jargon or some sort of flashy title for something and you don't understand, I'd rather have you say that right away so I can clarify and make sure that everybody feels like we all know what we're talking about, or you all know what I'm talking about throughout, because it's going to feel horrible if we get to the end and then your question is like, please define this word you used 2 minutes in. So please feel free to interrupt if I can be more clear or help you understand anything as we go. Sound good? Everybody on board so far? No one leaving? Great. Even a new person coming in. That's how great that intro was. Brought people in. Okay, so as Martin said, I graduated in 2005. But I would say my interest in work started young. I grew up in rural Oregon with a family that did not believe in allowance or getting money for getting good grades. Instead, if you didn't do your chores, then the animals didn't get fed. So how horrible would that feel? So I grew up really thinking about my kind of duty and role very young, and translated that into starting to volunteer when I was more formally volunteer as a middle schooler and high schooler. And for me, just a kind of reflection that I had even at the time, service, whether it was, you know, formal like Key Club, which is the Kiwanis of high schoolers, something formal like that, or just showing up to events that someone else had organized, that service felt like a really natural and comfortable space for me to lead. I didn't feel like it was weird to be able to be at a, you know, cleanup event and be like, hey, I'm gonna go over here, I've got this initiative, I'm gonna, you know, shout out if anybody wants to help me over here. It felt really natural to do that, and it felt good to be a leader in that way, where I could see the impact I was making. I wasn't just at an event, right? I was helping figure out how we're gonna clean this beach, or whatever it was. While I was at Valpo, I had a job here. Folks who were in Martin's class earlier are gonna have to hear some of the same bullet points, but we'll get through it, okay? There will be more this time, I promise. So I worked for the Caring Place here and had a really great opportunity to work both on their communications team and lead their teen outreach program. And in that work, use the tools that were available to me and that I thought were appropriate, which included the super early days of Facebook and thinking about communications online. At the time, you know, a newsletter was a thing that you actually printed in like a 2-column Microsoft Word document and then you mailed to people in the mail with a stamp. I thought maybe there were other ways to deliver that information. So created some email newsletters and also tried to segment those by who our community groups were, recognizing not everyone has the same interest in the organization, and volunteers need very different engagement than donors, for example. But when I was graduating, I realized that there wasn't anyone to really train on those tools and practices because, A, if you weren't a student, you couldn't have Facebook at that time. So it felt like, how are they going to continue to engage all of these supporters? And on the other side, folks didn't feel comfortable having email newsletters. That's why they didn't have them, right? It wasn't like I was just the first person to come up with this brilliant idea. It was that no one else there felt confident in those skills. At the same time, when I had gone home in between junior and senior year, I had applied for jobs, which I'm sure folks here will understand. You know you're going home for a few months and you apply for a job during that time. And I had applied with the largest foundation in Oregon who had summer-specific internships, and I thought, that'd be great, get to work in a foundation, I'm sure that's very ritzy. And I applied there, and their response to my application was, that's great, we hired other people to be the interns, but we, along with 4 other foundations, are taking a different approach to philanthropy and are going to invest all of our money into an initiative so that this new organization isn't fundraising, and they're not trying to create new programs. It is just a dedicated fund for a specific topic, and we want you to help start it. And I said, sure, I don't know what those words mean, but I'll show up on day 1 and we'll figure this out together, and I will not tell you I don't know what that means. And that was myself and 2 other women ultimately starting the Chalkboard Project, which is a statewide nonprofit that exists today focused on public education reform. So I started that in the summer, came back, and then after graduation went back to work in Portland. And part of my role there was similar to the Caring Place, looking at or finding those emerging opportunities where we could use technology to better connect with people. Chalkboard had a really lofty goal of trying to connect all Oregonians to find solutions to where our public education system wasn't serving students, or parents, or teachers, or superintendents, etc. And doing that with a staff of 3 doesn't normally mean let's just drive around to every single house in the state when that could be an 8-hour drive in one direction. It really meant figuring out how different technologies could help us both solicit ideas and help community members see those ideas from others so that more generative processes could emerge. And that was great. I really enjoyed that. However, I was 21 and they had some interesting ideas about how much you pay a 21-year-old, including you pay me for 35 hours so that you don't have to pay for my insurance. And like other people like me, defined as humans, we need health insurance. So I had to pay for that myself out of this very reduced salary. So, being an industrious Valpo grad, I decided to take on additional work. I started doing web design on the side, both to build up an interest area. I thought it was really interesting to do web design, and I hadn't done a lot of that in college or at all previously. But also it was the kind of thing where in 2006, an organization like, oh, you can build a thing? Great, we'll pay you for that. And I didn't need to tell them, again, I didn't know how to do it. I would just say, yes, I can totally build you a new website in 3 months. I will now go figure out how to build this website and make a lot of friends that are going to teach me lots of things, and I will get this done. So again, people don't need to know what your skills are. You just show up and say, yeah, I will do that thing, and then you can go figure it out on your own. And that meant that if I wasn't at work, I was in my apartment doing web design, and that has resulted in these, staring at a screen way too much. And it also meant that after about 2 years, I was so burnt out, the idea of showing up for work was like not gonna happen, And even though we had grown and established all of our programs and things like that at Chalkboard, it still was just the 3 of us. So the one other kind of program level staff person was feeling the same way. And we had said, we need help, this is not sustainable. The idea of self-care in the nonprofit sector was like not a thing in 2006. And mostly we were met with, well, just do your job. Cool, my job is like 5 people's job, so I need some help here. And eventually that was not provided. So myself and the other staff person left at the same time, and they replaced us with 6 people. I said, yes, that was the validation that we needed, but now we both don't work there and are off on our own. My kind of bottom of the barrel there, work-wise, feeling just so completely burnt out, meant that I continued to do that web design on the side because I found that you didn't tell organizations what time zone you were in, they didn't know. So as long as the emails came through or you delivered on what you said you would, you could go wherever. So I moved to Spain and continued to do that work for a few months on a 90-day visitor visa, and really just got to recharge myself and feel like, you know, web design is not my future or my path, but I feel like I could show up for work again and want to do that. And contacted the foundation that had, you know, back where I had originally applied for that internship, that had been one of the 5 creating Chalkboard, and said, hey, you know, as you probably know, I left Chalkboard. I've been in Spain, if that doesn't sound weird, but I'm returning. You know, are there any projects I could help with? Just thinking that'd be a jumping off point. They said, yes, we have a job for you, so that was helpful. And I was hired to do 2 things. 50% of my job was training nonprofits in the community on how to use emerging technologies, specifically as a response to the number of grant applications. You know, keep in mind, this is the largest foundation in the Pacific Northwest, except for Gates, who doesn't count because that's like a whole other thing. So they're giving millions and millions away every year, and they're getting grant proposals for $500 to go to a Facebook class. Like, this is not what we do as like our grant-making strategy. So I was hired to be the resource for those organizations, put on events, have office hours. Organizations could just come to me for help instead of ultimately wasting a program officer's time, right, filling out applications and wasting their own time thinking it was worthwhile to do. The other half of my job was managing the foundation's open source investments, and the foundation was the lead investor in 2 different open source products, one of which still exists today, is a grants management tool, and the other, yeah?
Yeah, what is open source?
Good question.
Thank you.
Open source, anyone involved in open source? Yeah, look at you 2. Okay. Well, you 2 can add on to this definition, but I'll try a very general approach. So open source means that the code you've created to create that app or that service or that website, that product, is visible and accessible to others. So if they wanted to add to it and make a new piece of that app, they could do so. Or if they wanted to completely copy it and then make a version for themselves, they could do so. And it normally also engenders a lot of community because whoever else is working on that kind of open source set of code wants to know the other people because you don't want to be writing the same thing, right? If you're both working on an update, you want to talk to each other and not do duplicative work. Were you going to add, Carl?
Yeah, I'd say think Wikipedia, but for software.
Yeah, exactly.
Because Wikipedia is an open source encyclopedia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If folks didn't hear that, Carl was saying Wikipedia for software. And being the lead investor as the foundation meant that they were kind of dictating which updates should be prioritized by the developers so that they could kind of get their own nuggets at the head of the list. And I was the person managing those projects, which was really exciting, you know, getting to liaise with these different developer teams. Yes?
I have a question now. Which projects were those?
One is called Wagon. It's basically, it exists but is not actively being developed now. It's a combination of kind of a database taxonomy with a wiki. So you would see a whole page, you would click to edit it, and then it would actually turn into all these different fields like a database. that were dynamically associated with the content. Happy to talk more about that. We just went real nerdy. And the other one is a grants management tool that the foundation continues to use as their own grants management portal. It's called Grantus. Yeah. And yes, so it was kind of fun work, and it felt like I was in a more an influential position than I'd had so far in my career, 3 jobs at that point, but it also felt extremely isolating. There was no one else at the foundation that knew what I did with my time or even as a concept. Because I think folks associated me with technology, you know, the foundation had a couple dozen staff, it had an IT department, I mean, it was a large established organization, but program officers would come to my desk and say, oh, can you come, there's a box on my screen I can't make go away. That's what you do, right? Cool. Not what I do. I'm happy to help with this box on your screen. One time, just like a side story, a program officer was having a problem, said that, and you know, saying that no one could help her, and that she'd start typing, and then the mouse would move around her screen, and words would show up in different places. Like that, I don't even know how I would approach that. Like, let's go to your desk and just start typing, let me see what you're doing on your screen. She had 2 mice, and one of the mice was under her keyboard. So she was typing like this, didn't think, oh gosh, this is strange, and yet was clicking on the screen by typing. So that day, I went home and was like, you know what? I am not IT support. I do not necessarily feel super respected in this job because, again, people don't know what I do. And isn't it important what I do here, right? Like it's not like we have 5,000 staff and you have never met me in the lunchroom. Like there's 20 of us and we sit in one office and I'm managing a lot of money for us. You know, it just didn't feel great. So I thought this is as good a time as any to move on and started to think about that. But during that time, I had also started sharing my ideas. And that came really naturally because, you know, again, half of my job was putting on events or one-on-one trainings for organizations about how to use these tools. So it was really natural to kind of go home from an event and write some reflections about what I saw or what I observed, or let me just write these tips once and then I can email this link instead of retyping this over and over, which is very common in that role. So I started my own blog, and we're putting thoughts up there, but I also found other publications that were interested in the perspective that I had, including Stanford Social Innovation Review. Because at that time, they didn't have anyone who was 23 and somehow blindly confident enough to write to them and say, oh, you know what you should be talking about is this topic. And of course, they were like, sure, put your money where your mouth is, you know, let's see that article. And that meant I could continue to offer articles. And I think what was so helpful about that, and we can talk more about this later, I mean, I did continue to contribute to SSIR and other places in my own site for many years, but what was so helpful is that it established me as a separate person from my organization. You know, I was not Amy that works at Meyer. It's like, I'm Amy, and I have my own thoughts, and I'm an autonomous human that others can recognize as such. And it really helped me network and find, because people just come out of the woodwork when you put something up online like that, other folks who agreed with me or had challenges to what I was saying and wanted to actually have a dialogue about a topic. And those are some of the relationships that I have closest still today, because they came from our shared ideas versus you're just the person I work with, or you're someone that, you know, always comes to events with me or something. So that was a huge, I think, kind of catalyst at that time. And so feeling like here I am sharing ideas, I'm finding other people that agree with me or challenge me or are at least interested in this topic, and I don't feel that way at work. It's time for a change. And that's when I transitioned to working at TechSoup Global. And it was an interesting opportunity because TechSoup, have folks heard of TechSoup before? Folks that work in nonprofits maybe have. If you are a 501c3 and you would like a free Microsoft Office edition or like Adobe Creative Suite, you go to TechSoup, you put in your C3 code, and then they give you the software. So they're kind of the broker for software for nonprofits. So anybody that has a kind of donation program where they give it away, it's brokered through TechSoup. It's a good clearinghouse to get tools. And that was, 95% of their business was brokering those relationships and distributing technology to nonprofits. But they recognized, at least at that time, this kind of budding opportunity to build community around technology, that people didn't just want to download software, they wanted to talk to other people who were using it or doing similar work and share best practices. So I was hired to build a global community. Sounds very overwhelming now, but at the time, again, I was like, sure, I could totally do that. Yes, person for the job. Do not ask me how I will do it. I will just go do it right now. And started making connections and building community groups. And over the kind of 2.5 years that I was there, by the time I left, we had, I want to say, 126 volunteer organized local events in 86 cities or states/countries around the world. So I was not going to all of those, of course. I was kind of in the background helping organizers put on events, find speakers, make connections locally to resources, etc. And also running innovation challenges. So in that same way that TechSoup served to bring in software for distribution, they also had relationships with folks like USAID to identify if they had funds available for tech investment. We would facilitate a process to identify if there were products out there, if there were new products people were hoping to build, and surface which ones could be most successful and invest the money in their work directly. And that was really exciting. It meant that I got to deliver the first dollars to invest in Ushahidi, a tool that folks maybe have heard of, that's an open source mapping tool that's been used all around the world as a way to respond to natural disaster. So responders can find what resources are, or where there's a fire, or where there's cholera in water, and we got to identify that as a potential product and invest in it, and now it's huge. So there were some pieces of that work that were really exciting, but again, it felt very isolating because, again, it was 1% of the organization's work, whereas the rest of their business model was in donations. So it felt like I had staff, but not 200 staff in California, like the rest of the organization. And again, that feeling that nobody in the organization knows what I'm doing, and that doesn't feel good. I want to be somewhere where this is the core of our work, not like a side project to focus on community. And again, thought, okay, I'll have some conversations with folks, but I think this might mean it's time to go. And unfortunately, those conversations resulted in, yes, that will continue to be 1% of our work. And great, at least then it's clear and transparent and everyone is on the same page. And that is at the same time that NTEN received a grant that took them from about $500,000 a year as an operating budget for their organization to $1.5 million budget a year. So going from 4 staff to 9 staff. And they called me and said, it's not public, we just got this grant. I've been an NTEN member for many years because, again, it was another place where I could have a platform for my voice. I could present at the conference, I could share articles, so I was known in that space. And they called and said, we've got this grant, it's not public, but what do you want to come work here? And I thought, okay, definitely not telling them that I'm not qualified to go work there, but if the ball's in my court, then I'm going to say, I want community to be central to every single staff person's job, regardless of the title. I want us to think about community-driven models for our work so that our programs are direct response to community need, and went down this whole list of what I felt was like, I've been doing this for a number of years, and I have these beliefs, and I have this passion, and I'm just going to put it out there. And their response was, that's great. I meant, what is your salary request? Yeah, you can do whatever you want. We just want to know if we can hire you. So I very quickly said yes to that opportunity and kept that list as like now I will send this out to staff. And, you know, I totally knew what they meant in that question, and started at NTEN. So when I originally started, I was the membership director. The first membership director for a membership organization, despite it starting 10 years prior to me joining. And that was kind of a little crack that I really bust open as an opportunity, because I could have stepped in and said, great, you know, it's not like, even though you haven't had a membership director, you obviously still administered membership. I could just continue to manage these transactions and support this work. But instead, this is my opportunity. This is me getting to say, here are my ideas about community, and I'm going to prove that they're the right ideas. And build a team in that way, build our strategies around community-driven models, and see how that goes. And after 2 years, our executive director stepped down, and again, was not going to talk about qualifications, but when they said, you know, the board said, great, our executive director has stepped down, we've hired this search firm, we're going to do a national search, we're such a big international nonprofit, we need to do a proper size search. I applied, and that was a whole separate talk about applying for a CEO position through a search firm and how many interviews you go through. But again, it really just felt like a point where I could have said, okay, I got it. I'm not, like, this isn't for me. This isn't my moment. I'm not qualified for this. I'm going to take myself out. Or I could just say, even if it is blind confidence, you should hire me. And if you don't think you should hire me, then I'm probably leaving this organization, because I know more about our models. I have designed our community practice. You know, go ahead and fire me. But I'm applying for this job. And I don't know who I was up against. Turns out I got the job, though. So I don't, it doesn't matter who the other candidates were, but I think really staying focused through that whole process on why I was in it. It wasn't because I wanted to be the CEO versus the membership director. It was that I wanted NTEN to be a leader in community-driven engagement and to see these strategies go from just the membership team to the entire organization. And at least said that convincingly enough, or loudly enough, or something, that the board said, okay, fine, we're hiring you. And now, here we are. I'm the CEO. It's super fun. I really recommend it, but you can't have my job. But you can go be a CEO somewhere else. And so I wanted to share a few thoughts or reflections about some of that process. And then also, like I said, share some thoughts that kind of drive me around nonprofit technology. So first, normally when I'm presenting, I am not talking about myself. This is very strange and uncomfortable, and I'm fighting the urge to just skip chapters or, talk really quickly. When I am normally presenting, I'm normally doing trainings and helping organizations, have like a 8-hour workshop on building their technology plans. And one of the very first things that I do when I start any workshop is define terms. And the first one I always define is community. I think everyone feels really comfortable and confident with the idea that we know what community is. But at least when we're talking very tactfully about our work, community means something specific. It is not all of our definitions of community. And I normally would have like a chart. So you can imagine that here is a circle. Okay, it's a very, very dynamic chart. You're going to be able to follow this. Okay, so there's a circle right here. And in the circle, it says your organization. Sometimes people think of that as your program or your institute, but ultimately, okay, here's your organization. The very first ring is your community. That means you're only saying someone's in your community because they're directly connected to you. There's nothing stopping them from calling you. There's nothing stopping you from calling them, emailing them. They are connected to you on Facebook, whatever it is. You're directly connected. And then after that is the network, so all of their friends and family. And you don't get to talk to them. The way you talk to the network is talking to your community and having a message that they think is interesting enough to share. So when Valpo sends a message to all the students that say, today there's going to be the best speaker you have ever heard from in your life, and you should come, her name is Amy, and you're like, oh my gosh, super convinced, definitely going to be the best talk I've ever heard. I'm going to forward this email to my friend. That is Valpo talking to the network. Okay, so sending a message that's so kind of relevant and on point and engaging with the community that they want to share it on. And then the crowd, of course, which like organizations, board members are constantly saying like, we should create a viral video. That's thinking that you could just directly communicate with the crowd in that final ring, which is, turns out not how it works. Please don't try and make a viral video tomorrow. That you talk to them by, again, making content that's so relevant to your community that they share it, share it, share it, and the network is also like, this is really great. I'm going to share it, share it, share it, and then it gets out to the crowd. So for me, realizing that I wanted to work in a networked position, I wanted to work in a place where I was not necessarily on the front lines of domestic violence support, work at the caring place, or responsible for every single policy proposal, like at Chalkboard, but in a position like I started to have once I was at the foundation, and from then on, thinking about how does any one initiative or campaign or investment help the rest of the sector? And how do we help organizations see that and make those connections and share with each other? But I wanted to do the work while talking to the community. I didn't want to work and try and build infrastructure at a very networked, removed layer. I wanted to help organizations make those connections, but I myself wanted to be in kind of a community engagement, community organizer role. Another piece of reflection that I have done throughout that process is recognizing that working in community engagement, especially digital community engagement, does not mean that my name is on everything. But usually, my job was to be invisible. If you're a really great facilitator, people leave that event not remembering who you are. Because what they remember are the connections they made, the conversations that they had, the people they want to follow up with. And that is sometimes hard to accept, because then you start to feel like you're not getting any credit for your work if people don't remember you, or your name isn't on the final product, but it's so much more sustainable. You don't have to be at the event for the event to go well if you have supported other community leaders being in those roles. Again, especially with technology, where you can very easily be in the background by saying, great, we're going to list your name on there, or you're going to have the login to the site, or whatever it might be, and giving myself kind of permission to say, yeah, take some credit, that was a really good event. You don't have to have your name on it to feel really good about it, Another was that technology, through all of this, which was my focus ultimately, right? In all of these jobs I was focused on technology, but it was never what I did. It was the means towards impact. It was the way that I was going to get my work done, or the way that we were going to enable aid workers to respond to a crisis, right? It was not the thing we were doing, but it was part of facilitating towards impact. And that was really important to me too, because I don't really care about specific technologies, because they're just going to change. So like, don't go get married to that thing. It's going to change tomorrow. Even if you're building it, you are going to want to change it tomorrow. So really focusing on technology as part of that facilitation, part of how we were helping communities organize and make impact. And something that I want to share as a reflection that was important for me to recognize, but I also will transition this to talking about some of what really drives my work, and that is recognizing that technology does not mean coding. It can mean coding. Coding is a part of working in technology, but if you spent more than 30 minutes today emailing, you were working in technology today. If you are sending out campaign updates in your organization, if you are accessing the database to run a report, all of those jobs are working in technology. And the more people discredit that, especially because those jobs are normally held by women and people of color, the more we say technology is something exclusively for white men. And that means we will continue to have technology that doesn't reflect all of us, and is not built with all of us in mind, does not serve all of us, And again, we could go many more years into a future where technology really only enables the kinds of connections, resources, communications, power that reflect the people that are building it. And I think that's a really scary path we could go down. So again, part of why I want to focus on community and recognizing the diversity of what working in technology means, and that technology is not our end goal, but something that we have to use and harness to do our work. I want to get more of us doing that. So a few just context pieces. One is that there are 1.8 million nonprofits just in the US. That's a lot. Yeah, I appreciate the wow. It is a lot. There were 80,000 nonprofits created just last year. Yeah. Despite that, only 15% of nonprofits in the US, so 15% of 1.8 million, which I don't know what is.
Around 300,000.
Around 300,000 according to Carl, in-house data. So 15% of all nonprofits have an annual operating budget that's more than $250,000. So potentially only 15% of organizations have a budget to even be paying staff at a livable wage and running programs. Okay, that's just like a reality check on the sector. On the tech side though, we have 1 in 5 adults in the US not online because they don't know why they would or they don't have the skills to go online. So a fifth of adults are not engaging in the conversations that you all may be engaging in. They are not accessing news and information about things that impact their life. They are not signing up for healthcare. They are not registering to vote. Like all of these pieces of our daily life, but also our civic life, that we don't really have to question because we know we could just do it on our phone or on our computer. We have a fifth of American adults who are not able to do that. Despite that, we have over 5,000 tech-specific kind of tech jobs unfilled because there's a skill gap. So we have a few different things at play here. And I think, for me, the fear that I have is that, again, we will have women and people of color or people who it is their very first, they're the first generation going to higher education or they're the first generation getting a job in the US, automatically disqualifying themselves from applying for some of these jobs. If I could give some of my very blind confidence to other people, I gladly would. This is my gift to you, is to leave here with blind confidence, because otherwise we're not going to change these numbers. We can't just create more nonprofits because it's a losing battle for resources, right? If there's only 15% that have 250,000 and you create another one, I don't want you to spin your wheels and waste your time when somebody's probably already thought of that. Or they haven't thought of it, but you could be housed inside of an existing sustainable organization instead, right? Bring your ideas to them. It also means that we're going to continue to have issues in technology that we're already seeing. So we already have artificial intelligence tools built entirely by white male teams that cannot recognize the faces of people who are not white males. So as we very, very quickly move to an extremely digitized world where things like an ad on a bus stop is going to profile you and deliver information to you, and it cannot tell that you're there, that's going to change our experience for a lot of our communities, right? We also have a decreasing level of memory. People in younger generations have markedly, measurably less internal memory that's being accessed than older generations because we know we can just Google it, right? But again, if we are relying on being able to Google it, and that search algorithm was not built by people that look like you or talk like you or have experiences like you, are you going to get search results that are actually what you were looking for? Or are you going to get search results that are what someone else thought you should know, right? We also have, to be specific to the nonprofit sector, we have databases that are altering the impact organizations can have and are contributing to poor client engagement. Because if your database, say, requires that you pick male or female instead of man, woman, or transgender, you automatically have clients that do not fit into the rubric of your database. Again, you didn't create that database. You're not trying to put those labels on people, but you've adopted technology created by people that do not reflect your community. And that decision alone, even though, again, you could say, well, we didn't create it, we didn't want it to be that way, we're adopting a technology that's impacting our community. So not just as individuals, but also as nonprofits, we need to recognize that we are able to participate in technology, that we are able to shift it and create it and determine its path, because otherwise we will end up with a world that only works for some of us, and that number will be very few. So I'm going to stop. I feel like I just entered a place of real intense soapbox. So I'm going to pause and see if there's questions, if there are stories of blind confidence any of you want to share. I'm happy to hear that, or give you my little mic, whatever that might be. Don't all ask a question at once, though. It'll be very overwhelming.
Well, Amy, I have a question.
Yeah.
So clearly you went out into the world after you left Valpo with a sense that you wanted community.
Yeah.
How did you experience community here? Did you have experiences here that you carried with you that were important for you finding your pathway to purpose through those in some ways very isolating, intellectually elegant jobs?
Unfortunately, I would say that experience started here. I did not feel like Valpo was my community. And I think part of that is my fault, and part of that was the larger institution. The part that is my fault, and I totally own, is that my long time, at that time at least, boyfriend went to Notre Dame. So Thursday afternoon when classes are done, I drove 45 minutes, or what is probably on Google Maps supposed to be like 70 minutes, to South Bend for the weekend so that we were together. Or he would come here, but mostly I went there. And because if you have a illegal student pass to Notre Dame football games, you go. You use your fake student pass. So I normally went there. So that meant I didn't have as many of the kind of organic social spaces here that you would have otherwise. I also was a transfer. So after my freshman year elsewhere, I transferred in, and I was, I don't know what the policy is now, but at that time, if you were a transfer woman, you had to be in the sorority dorm. And I called the university and said, I have no interest in being in this dorm. I have no interest in being in a sorority. And my answer that I received was that it was the best way to ensure I had community. And that I could wait a semester and then transfer out. So on day one, just to make a point, because I think all of you now understand the level of blind confidence I would like to have in all situations, I showed up day one, went to the registrar's office and said, where is my dorm transfer form? I'm just going to fill it out now because I want you to know that I'm not happy with this situation. So I also felt like I didn't connect with people in my living space. So in that way, I get it. Those were some situations I participated in, but I also then had to be very intentional about community because I knew that the dorm wasn't my community. I knew that I wasn't here on the weekends. So I used a lot of service because, again, that's where I felt comfortable being a leader or having a voice. So I used the honor societies. I used, we had opportunities on campus to, I don't know, does the Lighter still exist? Okay, so I was the editor and the graphics designer for the Lighter, and used that as a way to form, the 5 of us that worked on that became my friends. And they were different grades and, different majors, but that was kind of my intentional community that I had to be thoughtful about because otherwise I wouldn't have had anyone. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Other questions? Yeah. You might have to shout it out.
Okay. I'm a quiet person, so this is hard for me.
I love it. Blind confidence. Shout it out. Yeah.
So, I am currently a junior here, and I'm actually very interested in working with nonprofits nonprofit to actually ask Nancy. I just changed to individualized major
Nice.
so I could be in the realm of learning about
Yeah.
nonprofits. How would you suggest that I try to get into that field as soon as I graduate instead of like generally like kind of flowing into it several years after?
There are a ton of jobs. Apply for a job. Seriously. I mean, don't go in being like, I have this fancy VU degree, so I'm only going to have this type of job because, so, you know, NTEN just had our annual conference, 2,300 people in a ballroom, and I said from stage, I was referencing something about my own experience, and I said that I had an English major. How many English majors are in the room? I mean, yes, here, but also in 2,300 people who work in nonprofit technology, easily half the room said they were English or literature, because writing is something that we think we like in college, and then we get other jobs where we have to write all day. I can craft an email like nobody's business, okay, because I did creative writing. But so don't be fancy about your title, because you can apply for another job, because there will be another job. But just get in so that you can say, whoa, I don't like that. Or, oh, I really like this thing, but it's only part of my job. How do I go somewhere else with that? Because what you think outside nonprofits isn't going to be then what it's like on the inside. So the quicker you can just say, I have any job, here I am, okay, like let's go on this ride for a while and figure it out, you'll be in such a better place to advocate for your skills than trying to work somewhere else and, you know, make that decision later, I think. But there's nonprofit folks in the room. If you disagree, I'm open to you disagreeing, but would love for you to share your ideas too. Yeah, Bill?
Just that I spent several years on the board of a
501c3?
501c3 nonprofit educational foundation, which no longer exists. And that was a painful experience. I wish that I had met you before that happened, or...
We'll go back in time. We'll change it. Technology's got to be really close.
I wish we could.
Way back.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on what you and Samantha were talking about, because in my role with the Institute for Leadership and Service, I talk to students who want to, when they graduate, go into the nonprofit sector quite often. And actually, I was talking with one graduate today who's been doing that. And often their experience is of isolation.
Yeah.
And they're going there because they have a sense, I want to do something meaningful. I want to work where people are trying to make a difference. So I'm going to act on my values. And they get in there and they do get put off. They're not made part of the team. They're given an assignment and go off and do it. And so I'm wondering, along with like just take a job and do it, if you're there, and you know, in exit isn't the only strategy, right? There's you know, they talk about exit and voice and loyalty as 3 strategies in an organization. What do you do with voice as a entry level, right out of college or graduate school employee when you find yourself in that isolation tank?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely experienced that. Well, before I share that, just a kind of context point that with 1.8 million nonprofits in the U.S., the nonprofit sector is the largest employment sector in the U.S. That means there's going to be real bad workplaces, and there's going to be good ones, right? If it's the biggest pool, we're going to have everything represented in there. So it's not always like you're broken because it doesn't feel good. Sometimes the organization isn't healthy. So don't feel that,
Well,
Are
I
you just
work for
amening that, or
YMCA,
Oh,
which is the largest and oldest social service organization in the world. And
Yeah.
they're a great nonprofit to work for because they're so established.
Yeah.
And they've been around for so long.
Yeah.
And they were the first nonprofit that I worked for, unfortunately, because it was such a great model.
Yeah.
But I've worked for nonprofits my entire life. I worked for a for-profit once, Crate and Barrel.
Oh,
and
nice.
once I met Gordon Stagel, and I was like, wow, I'm making you richer every day, man.
Yeah.
You know, why am I doing this, you know? But I got sucked into the why when I first started. I became a water aerobics instructor, and they were like, oh, yeah, you're hired. And you want to go camping with the swim team this weekend? Because we don't have a woman to go. You know, like they're just going to suck you in.
Stuff. Yeah, so what I was going to share is that at Chalkboard, where ultimately I did get super burned out, I tried the voice tactic. Loyalty was that I had a great advocate in that one other staff person, but because it became like just the two of us fighting against something that wasn't going to change, the loyalty didn't support very well. But with voice, what I found to be successful, and I don't present this as like a universal truth, but in my experience what was successful was being able to say, I've already done my job. Like I did all my job already today. You can't say like go back to work. I already did my job. There's 1 hour, and what I'm going to do with that hour is I'm going to build up a youth investment council. And I will show you the strategy doc that I created. I will show you my plans. I will report back on this. I'm going to treat this like, you know, the level of programming that we do for all of our other programs, and I'm doing it on top of my job. This isn't like taking away from anything, so you can't like criticize it in the same way. But I found that voice was most successful for me, especially then as a young woman, to say, it's not my idea. I proved that it was right, right? Like, here's how many youth showed up to our first council meeting. Here's the ideas that they have coming out of that meeting. Instead of saying, I really want to do this, I really want to do this, can I do this, please let me do this. I just said, I'm going to, here's my plan, and now I'm going to show you how successful it is. Because I also feel like there's nothing like peer pressure. Like, if I talk to partners at these events, told them about this youth investment council I was working on, and then they said to the executive director, wow, that's a really cool youth investment program, maybe we could partner on that. The executive director wasn't going to say, I don't like that, Amy's going to stop working on it. She's going to be, yep, my idea, so glad we're working on it, right? So that was my approach to voice, was I'm going to show you that my idea is worthwhile. Yeah. Yeah.
How does a for-profit operate like a nonprofit beyond the scope of donations?
The idea of one profit versus nonprofit working like the other is just like this constant catch-22 debate. I think that there are practices that both could do, and some organizations on either side decide to do them or not. I think the biggest that people normally point to is that a nonprofit is going to answer to a board of directors. For some nonprofits, that is 2 people, and it's the couple that created the organization. For the Women's Foundation, that means there are 25 of us. So we're reporting to a board, versus a for-profit often is reporting to all of the people that invested in it. And that means when you're reporting to that board or those investors, we're saying we're making an impact. Here are our numbers. This is the kind of impact we're having in the community. And a for-profit is saying, don't you worry, we're making you money. That's why there are organizations, for-profits, that really try and tout their triple bottom line, meaning, don't worry, we're also doing good. Normally it's defined as, don't worry, we're not completely destroying this community that are our customers, because if we destroyed them, they wouldn't buy our product anymore. So it's, I wouldn't say doing good, it's just ensuring that the market continues. But that's, I think, the biggest push for that is that ultimately you're just saying, at any cost, we're making you money. Open to other people's definition. But that is certainly the biggest pieces of the conversation that come up in our world, where we have tech companies as normally the ones who people are looking at as the for-profit and the nonprofits, because that's our intersection. Yeah.
I think we have time for one more short question.
Okay, super baby question. There was a hand over here. Yeah.
Just really quick, I work at a nonprofit currently, and part of my job is writing the newsletters internally and externally.
Nice.
And it's all online. So what really struck me was when you said 1 in 5 adults aren't engaging in online activity. Do you have any suggestions for how you get involved with those people who aren't being reached online?
Great question. I have a lot of ideas, and I will email them to you if you email me at amy@nten.org. Because they are more than our baby answer will allow. But very quickly, I will say, I think the most important way to reach those adults who aren't online is to find the organizations that they show up for. In many communities, that might be a church. It might be another social service agency that they do know they need, and they go to that organization and build bridges with those organizations to say, hey, we also do this work. It's not in competition, it's not the work that you do. How can we make sure that your community knows they have access to this? And showing up in those other spaces. Yeah. Yeah, sure.
All right, folks, I think Amy will be around a little longer, but let's give her a warm round of applause.